Welcome to Korea. Today we are going to explore some of the most amazing places in the city. I've put together what I think is the perfect day in Seoul for a first-time visitor. Along the way, I'll be sharing the history, culture, and stories behind each location. We're going to visit historical landmarks, check out some incredible photo spots, try a few unique experiences, and explore the streets that make Seoul so memorable. We'll see different sides of Seoul during the day and at night. And of course, we are going to find out why Korea is famous for its food. We'll be trying some real local favorites that Seoul residents keep coming back to. Let's go! Hello everyone, it's Sam. So today we are starting our first day in Seoul. The route for today is Gyeongbokgung Palace, the National Folk Museum of Korea, Bukchon Hanok Village, Jogisa Temple, a local food street, and finally Cheonggyecheon. Today we will be doing the entire route on foot, so no buses, no subway, just walking. We will probably end up walking around 25,000 steps today, so make sure you bring comfortable shoes. Right, let me get ready. So we are now standing in front of Gwanghwamun. Before we look at Gwanghwamun, there's something you should know about Gyeongbokgung. Gyeongbokgung Palace was completed in 1395 and served as the main palace of the Joseon dynasty, the most important royal palace in the kingdom. When King Taejo founded the Joseon dynasty in 1392, the capital was still Gyeongsang, the former capital of the Goryeo dynasty. But after founding a new kingdom, he won a new capital as well. So in 1394, he moved the capital to Seoul. He then began planning a new palace that would become the center of the new dynasty. That palace was Gyeongbokgung. What I found especially interesting is how quickly everything happened. The master plan for the new capital was completed in just a few months. Construction of the palace began in late 1394 and the first phase was completed in 1395. 3 years later, even the palace walls were finished. But the story of Gyeongbokgung was only just beginning. The palace went through the Japanese invasion of Korea in the 16th century, the Japanese colonial period, the Korean War, and many other events throughout Korean history. Because of this, many of the original buildings were lost. So large-scale restoration work began in 1990 and much of what we see today has been rebuilt. In fact, the restoration is still ongoing today. In a way, Gyeongbokgung tells the story of Korea itself. Right, now let's get back to Gwanghwamun. So we are now standing in front of Gwanghwamun. It's a main gate and first gateway into Gyeongbokgung Palace. But before we head inside, there are two things I want to show you guys. First, take a look at the two stone creatures standing on either side of the gate. These are called hate, mythical creatures from Korean tradition. According to legend, the hate could distinguish right from wrong and would punish wrongdoing with its horn. Because of this, it's become a symbol of justice and law. During the Joseon dynasty, the hate even appeared on the insignia of the Daesahan, one of the highest-ranking officials responsible for upholding justice. Even today, you can still find hate statues in front of important government buildings, such as the National Assembly. But the hate had another role as well. It was believed to protect against fire. The hate are facing Gwanghwamun Mountain. In the past, people believed the Gwanghwamun Mountain carries strong fire energy and could bring destructive fires to the capital. So, to protect the palace, the hate were placed here as guardians. The second thing to look at is this stone platform called Walde. I like to think of it as the royal red carpet of the palace. The 7-meter wide path running through the center was reserved for the king, while the paths on either side were used by officials and other visitors. What's interesting is that this was not here until recently. The original wall that disappeared, but it was finally restored in 2023. As part of the restoration, the road that once ran straight across the front of Gwanghwamun was redesigned into the curved road you see today. So now, visitors can enter the palace much the same way people did during the Joseon dynasty. Gyeongbokgung follows a traditional palace layout known as a 3-gate, 3-courts. This was a common principle in East Asian palace architecture at the time, requiring 3 gates leading toward the main throne hall and 3 separate places zone, each serving a different purpose. Gwanghwamun is the first of those 3 gates. One of its most distinctive features is the massive stone base supporting the wooden structure above it. For comparison, the main gate of Changdeokgung Palace, Donhwamun, rises directly from its stone foundation. If you look beneath the gate, you will notice three arched entrances. The center arch was reserved for the king and was built slightly higher than the two arches on either side. But there's another detail that many visitors miss. At the very top of each arch is a protective carving known as a 벽사상, created to ward off evil spirit. It's a mythical creature that looks a bit like a dragon with a horn. And if you look closely, you will notice something unexpected. It's sticking out its tongue. I guess even people 600 years ago liked adding a little humor to their work. I like that. Now we are inside Gwanghwamun. Once you pass through the gate, you will find a large courtyard and the ticket office is located on the right. Admission is 3,000 won per person. You may also notice a lot of people wearing a hanbok, Korean tradition clothing. Visitors wearing hanbok can enter Gyeongbokgung for free without purchasing a ticket. So there are plenty of hanbok rental shops nearby. So if you're interested, it's a great way to save on admission and take some memorable photos at the same time. If possible, I recommend arriving before 10 a.m. here. That's when the royal guard changing ceremony begins. The ceremony started in 2002 and is based on the traditions of the royal guards who protect the palace during the Joseon dynasty. If you'd like a good viewing spot, I recommend arriving around 9:30 a.m. And this courtyard also carries a painful chapter of Korean history. Today it's an open space, but during the Japanese colonial period, this area was occupied by the Japanese government general building. Japan constructed its colonial administrative headquarters in the center of Gyeongbokgung. To make room for it, Gwanghwamun was relocated and Hyangwonjeong, the second gate of the palace, was demolished. The government general building was then built in its place. This was not simply a construction project. It was also intended to place a symbol of colonial rule directly at the heart of Korea's most important royal palace. The building remained here for decades after Korea regained its independence, but it was finally demolished in 1995, and the large-scale restoration of Gyeongbokgung began. So, the open space you see today is not how this area looked for most of the 20th century. It is the result of ongoing effort to restore the palace to its original form. After passing through Hyangwonjeong, the second gate of the palace, you will need to cross a small bridge called Yeongjegyo before reaching the third gate. And there are a few interesting things here that are worth taking a close look at. If you look to either side of the bridge, you will see four stone creatures looking down toward the water. These are called cheonrok, mythical creatures from Korean traditions that were believed to appear when king governed wisely and took good care of his people. So these statues were placed here with the hope that the king would rule well enough for a cheonrok to appear. Over the past 600 years, Gyeongbokgung has been burned, destroyed, rebuilt, and restored many times because of wars, invasions, and other events throughout Korean history. But these cheonroks have been here since the palace was first built, making them some of the oldest surviving sculptures in Gyeongbokgung. One of them was even moved to another location at one point and was damaged before eventually being returned. But honestly, when you look at close, they're kind of funny. One of them is sticking out its tongue and other looks like it's not quite sure if it wants to be here or not. The German architect Mies van der Rohe said God is in the detail. And I think that's exactly what we are seeing here. The tongue-sticking guardian carving under Gwanghwamun and the playful expression of these cheonrok are small details that many visitors walk right past. But to me, they are part of what makes Gyeongbokgung feel less like a collection of old buildings and more like a masterpiece. I love it. Now let's pass through Geunjeongjeon, the third gate of the palace, and make our way to Geunjeongjeon, the heart of Gyeongbokgung Palace. If you remember the 3-gate 3-court layout I mentioned earlier, this area belongs to the first of the 3 courts, the outer court. This was the section of the palace used for official ceremonies and state affairs. This is the most important building in the palace and one of the most iconic buildings of the Joseon dynasty. The structure you see today was rebuilt in 1867 after the original building was destroyed during the Japanese invasions of Korea in the 16th century. It is the largest surviving wooden building in Korea and was used for major state ceremonies, including royal coronations and receptions for foreign envoys. But before we take a closer look, let's take a few photos. Try taking one from the center and then another from the front right side. From here, you can capture Geunjeongjeon with the mountains surrounding Seoul in the background, creating one of the best photo spots in the palace. Now, take a look at the ground beneath your feet. The courtyard is paved with thin stone slabs known as bakseok. These stones were highly valued because they could only be quarried in 13 regions and were reserved for important sites such as Geunjeongjeon and Jongmyo Shrine. At first glance, they may look uneven and rough. Some people even think they look messy or uncomfortable to walk on. But there's actually a reason for that. On bright sunny days, the uneven surface scatters sunlight in different directions, helping to reduce glare. This reflects the practical wisdom of the people who designed the palace. Bakseok also played an important role in drainage. The courtyard was built with a slight slope so that rainwater would naturally flow downward. As water moved through the gaps between the stones, it slowed down and spread out instead of rushing straight across the courtyard. This helped prevent erosion and improve the drainage during heavy rain. Even the stones beneath our feet were carefully designed with both beauty and function in mind. If you look closely at Geunjeongjeon, you will notice that the building stands on the large elevated stone platform. The stairways and railing of the platform are decorated with beautifully carved animals, including figures from the 12 zodiac signs. Although it appears to be a two-story building, it is actually a single-story wooden structure with an exceptionally high ceiling. The southern staircase was reserved for the king and features carvings of Hete and phoenixes. The phoenix was symbol of peace and prosperity, and it is still used today in the official emblem of the President of South Korea. Inside the building, the ceiling is decorated with royal dragon motifs that symbolize the authority of the king. Behind the royal throne is the Ilwal Obongdo, the famous painting of the sun, moon, and five peaks. This painting symbolizes that king and the kingdom itself. Interestingly, the symbol is still used today and can also be found in the office of the President of South Korea. Another thing worth noticing is the construction method. Unlike modern concrete buildings, the wooden structure of Geunjeongjeon is fully exposed. The building was constructed using traditional joinery techniques with wooden components fitted together without relying on nails. This allowed the structure to remain durable for centuries while also helping it withstand shocks and earthquakes. More than 600 years later, Geunjeongjeon still stands as one of the finest examples of traditional Korean wooden architecture. Let's move on to the next area. In the 3-gate 3-court layout, this area belongs to the second court known as the middle court. This was the public area where the king and his officials discussed state affairs and carried out the daily business of government. This is Sajeongjeon. If Geunjeongjeon was the ceremonial heart of the palace, Sajeongjeon was where the king actually worked. You can think of it as the king's office. This was where he met with officials, discussed the state affairs, and made important decisions. On either side of Sajeongjeon are two auxiliary halls called Manchunjeon and Chanchujeon. Their names come from spring and autumn, and unlike Sajeongjeon, they were equipped with underfloor heating. If you look across from Sajeongjeon, you will notice several buildings with rows of doors. These were royal storage buildings. You can think of them as the palace warehouse. Since they stored royal property, I'm guessing there were a lot of expensive things in there. When it came to naming the storage building, they didn't use numbers. Instead, they followed the order of the 1,000-character classic. There's another fun details as well. Many of the ceramic items delivered to the palace had the name of their destination storage building marked on the bottom before they even arrived. In other words, the delivery label was added before the item left the factory. That way, everyone already knew exactly where each item was supposed to go. Sajeongjeon itself is also quite different from Geunjeongjeon. The building is smaller and the interior is much less elaborate. The space was designed to be practical rather than impressive. You can also see how close officials were able to see to the king during meetings. It gives us a glimpse into a system that valued communication and administration, not just royal authority. There's one more interesting thing about this place. It wasn't a very private workspace. Whenever the king discussed state affairs, affairs known as Seungji and Sagwan were present to record everything that was said. Their job was to document the king's words and actions in detail. According to one famous story, even if the king said, "Don't write that down," they would write that down that the king had told them not to write it down. Many of those records eventually became the Seungjeongjeon Ilgi and the Annals of the Joseon Dynasty, helping create one of the most remarkable record-keeping traditions in the world. After passing Sajeongjang, we arrive at the final section of the three-courtyard layout, the inner court. This was the private living area of the royal family. We will first see Gyeongjeongjeon, the king's residence, followed by Gyeongjeon, the queen's residence. And if you pay attention to the details, you will notice some interesting differences between the two. First, Gyeongjeon has a raised stone platform called a walldae, while Gyeongjeon does not. It was used for royal events and small court gatherings. Another difference is that Gyeongjeon is connected to surrounding buildings by covered corridors, while Gyeongjeon stands more independently. Many of those surrounding buildings were used by the queen's attendants and court ladies. Despite these differences, both buildings share one unusual feature. Neither of them has a yongmaru, a ridge that runs along the very top of the roof. You will find one on buildings like Geunjeongjeon and Sajeongjang, but not here. Interestingly, the word yong in yongmaru means dragon in Korean. There are several theories as to why these buildings don't have one. One popular explanation is that the king himself was considered the dragon, so there was no need to place another one above his residence. In other words, one dragon was enough. Now let's take a look at Gyeongjeon. If you look at the entrance, you will notice some unusual structure on either side of the gate. They may not look like it, but they are actually chimneys. They are decorated with red bricks and inscriptions wishing for long life and prosperity. What's even more interesting is that these chimneys were actually built for Gyeongjeon. There wasn't enough space behind the king's residence to place larger chimneys, so they were constructed here instead. Behind Gyeongjeon, you will find a beautiful terraced garden called Amisan. According to tradition, it was created as a gift from the king to Queen. And if you look carefully, you will see another set of decorative brick structures. Those are chimneys too. Like the chimneys near Gyeongjeon, they were built using red bricks and covered with elaborate decorative designs. Today, chimneys are usually treated as purely functional structure, but here, even something as ordinary as chimney was turned into a work of art. I think it's another reminder that the builders of Gyeongbokgung paid attention to every detail. We've now explored all three gates and three courts of Gyeongbokgung. Now it's time for a short break. Let's head over to Geunjeonghoeru, one of my favorite places in the palace. It's also one of the most popular spots in Gyeongbokgung. During cherry blossom season, it's especially popular with couples, and it's also a favorite place for wedding and first birthday photo spots. Gyeonghoeru was not part of the original Gyeongbokgung Palace. There's an interesting story behind why it was built. In 1392, Taejo founded the Joseon Dynasty. But in 1398, after the first strife of princes, he abdicated the throne in favor of his second son, Jeongjong. Because of political instability, Jeongjong moved the capital from Seoul back to Gyeongsang. Just 2 years later, in 1400, after the second strife of princes, Jeongjong handed the throne over to his younger brother Taejong. In 1405, King Taejong moved the capital back to Seoul. But instead of returning to Gyeongbokgung, he built a new palace next door called Changdeokgung. There are several theories as to why. One popular story says he didn't want to live in Gyeongbokgung because it was where the bloody struggle for the throne had taken place. Many officials opposed building a new palace. Gyeongbokgung was still relatively new. But Taejong insisted, "I'm not abandoning Gyeongbokgung. It will remain the main palace of Joseon." And almost as if to prove it, he began construction of Gyeonghoeru in Gyeongbokgung in 1411. One thing that amazes me is how quickly Gyeonghoeru was built. Around 5,000 workers took part in the project, and from the master plan to completion, it took only 8 months. Construction began in 1411 and was completed in 1412. The man in charge of the project was Park Ja-chung. What's even more remarkable is that he was born into slavery. His talent was so exceptional that he was entrusted with one of the kingdom's most important construction projects. He later rose to a position comparable to today's Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. Gyeonghoeru is a two-story pavilion supported by 48 massive stone columns. It was large enough to host around 1,000 guests at once. Inside, the floor is divided into 3 slightly raised levels. So during the cold months, the doors were closed and banquets were held in the inner section. But what I found most fascinating is the pond surrounding the pavilion. The pond was completely man-made. Its floor isn't level. Instead, it was built with a gentle slope from northeast to southwest, so that water could flow naturally. Water entered the pond from 3 different sources, one flowing down from above, one entering at the same level, and one springing up from beneath the pond. The water then flowed around the 2 artificial islands before leaving the pond. Everything was designed so the water could circulate naturally without pumps or any mechanical system. Even after more than 600 years, I think that's an incredible piece of engineering. Now let's head to our final stop in Gyeongbokgung, Gyeonjeongjeon. Gyeonjeongjeon was built by King Gojong, the last king of the Joseon dynasty, after the reconstruction of Gyeongbokgung was completed. Rather than feeling like a grand royal palace, it looks more like an elegant upper-class Korean home. But if the king already had Gyeongjeongjeon, why build another residence? There are several theories. One popular explanation is that King Gojong wanted to become more politically independent from his father, Hungsandaewanggun. Another is that he simply wanted a private place where he could live more comfortably. To be honest, I kind of understand him. Ever since I started this YouTube channel, I could move back to my parents' house and save my own rent. But I still choose to live on my own. Maybe King Gojong felt something similar. In front of Gyeonjeongjeong is Hyangwonjeong, a beautiful pavilion surrounded by a pond. It was built a private retreat for the king and queen. Personally, I think it's one of the most beautiful places in all of Gyeongbokgung. Gyeonjeongjeong follows the layout of upper-class Korean residence of the time. It was divided into 3 main areas: the king's quarter, the queen's quarter, and the service building used by choir ladies and palace staff. But this beautiful place is also remembered for one of the darkest moments in Korean history. In the late 1800s, Korea found itself caught between powerful neighbors including China, Russia, and Japan. Japan wanted to bring Korea under its control, but Queen tried to balance Japan's growing influence by building closer relationship with China and Russia. So to Japan, she became the biggest obstacle. After defeating China in the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894, Japanese soldiers and armed civilians entered Gyeongbokgung and assassinated Queen here at Gyeonjeongjeong. The place you are looking at right now is where that happened. The assassination became a major turning point that eventually led to Japanese occupation of Korea. In 1905, Japan took control of Korea's foreign affairs, and King Gojong was forced to abdicate. And in 1910, Korea was formally annexed by Japan, beginning 35 years of Japanese colonial rule. We've now finished our first stop of today's tour, Gyeongbokgung. The rest of today's tour continue in part 2. I will see you there.